In more traditional approaches, people are often doing design sessions, a lot of design sessions up front. You get people who are in their job title an architect. And in some organizations, architects feel they don't have to write any code. That's in the past. Developers write code. The architects just design. So what they then do is, they think all this through. They write a big class diagram. They design all sequence diagrams. And in their head, they think about how the software will work, do all that design, and then give to developers what that design is, so developers can implement it. That sounds very good. It sounds like somebody's really putting a lot of effort in it. But on the other hand, it often doesn't work. Or most of the time, I would say, it doesn't work. What happens is that people look at what the architects gave them, try it, and find out that it doesn't really work that way. And I think that's fair. I don't think anybody can actually plan all this in their head. I think most of the time when you write code, it's more interactive. You start writing a bit, you see how it works, and then you extend on it. And I'd say even when you're planning not to do Agile, you will have an approach in which you check your code or you compile more often. I mean, if you think about it, if you think about what it would really mean to do real waterfall development, where you do all the planning, and then all the coding, and then the deployment, that would mean you compile your source code once, and it compiles without error. Because you've done all the planning up front, and you don't make mistakes. That's a myth. That never happens. So you always have that alleged discipline that doesn't work, you work around it. And the same holds true with Agile. Only in Agile you admit that you're not infallible. You admit that you need a couple of iterations. And when people say it's cowboy coding, then they just don't understand. They don't want to admit that you actually have to try. That you can't just plan everything up front and it will work out exactly like you've planned it. Another one, but I'm coming back to that a bit later, is that people are saying, oh, in Agile, you have the developers speak directly to the business people. That means I don't need any testers, or they do test-driven development. I don't need testers. Or the developers speak to the business people, so I don't need analysts. They just think they can do away with all these roles. But again, it's absolutely not true. You do need these things. It's just an interpretation that you could arrive at by looking at it. Slightly different, new slide, different topic. One thing that also doesn't help when you're trying to run an Agile project for the first time in an organization. The people who invented Agile, and actually it's not really true, nobody invented Agile. There were a couple of people who realized that they were doing something slightly different than other people. And they sat down together and they tried to find out what they had in common. And Martin Fowler tells the story that when they were sitting together, they actually didn't know what they would call it. They just knew they were doing things differently. And they needed a name for it. And what they really wanted, they wanted the name adaptive development. Because the key idea was you adapt to the change around you. The problem was that somebody else had used the term adaptive development already. So those guys had to find a different name. And they came up with Agile. So even the name Agile isn't perfect. But some of the other words that we're using are even less perfect. One very, very common flavor of Agile development is extreme programming. And I don't know why they call it extreme. But in English, extreme is not a word that managers generally like. Most managers are about risk, about minimizing risk, about being conservative, to not have surprises. And then we come along and say we are doing something extreme. They really, really don't want to hear it. The only thing they hear is risky. They don't hear what you mean. You say extreme programming, and you have a good idea what it means, you have good connotations, and you know there are strong practices, but the manager doesn't hear that. He doesn't know it. All he hears is that word, extreme, and he's scared. So just don't say it. Call it something different. So when you're saying we do extreme programming, rather than saying that, explain what the benefits are. In many ways we've started saying lean, meaning we're not wasting a lot of time. That's a good way of approaching it. Or similarly, coming back to pair programming. Again, when you say pair, as I explained earlier, a lot of people hear 2, and 2 is double the cost. So rather than pair programming, you can easily call it continuous code review. And that explains much better to the developer, to the manager,